You're listening to Pardon the Disruption with your host, Tom Young.
Hey, welcome to the show. This is Tom Young. I'm sitting here with my good friend, Rob Finkel from WilmerHale. Rob, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been, we've known each other for a while, so it's great to see you.
It's a little over 20 years. I checked the calendar.
It's a good thing we look exactly the same as we did 20 years ago.
I wish I did anyway. Hey, so we're here in your New York City offices here in World Trade Center. You're in Building 7 here up on the 45th floor. And we just had a nice conversation over the last couple hours about trends in the industry and things that are happening, because you and I have both been doing this for quite a long time, and we've seen a lot of cycles in the industry play out. But let's talk about your building here, because you guys have quite beautiful office space.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. We're in 7 World Trade Center, which is one of the original World Trade Center sites. It was the site of the New York City Emergency Management group. And this is the building that came down, not because it was hit by one of the planes, but it came down because there was a big oil tanker beneath it that caught on fire. And a lot of the pictures that you saw from 9/11 of Rudy Giuliani and his team walking away from the World Trade Center were from this building. He was in this building.
Yeah. And
what's so amazing is that this is such a wonderful building that's built on the old site. It was the first of the buildings that were built down here that were occupied. Larry Silverstein, who has leased for the site, is one of the tenants here as well. In fact, you see him coming to the building from time to time. So we've been down here for about 7 years or so. It's a great building with, as you said, amazing light. Really nice office space, really modern.
Yeah.
And a really kind of a terrific place to work as well.
I remember I visited you here shortly after it opened, and you told me that you were. Because of the views, you have floor-to-ceiling windows, and you have views north, south, east, and west. You have the whole floor here. It's beautiful. You have some beautiful space. A lot of production companies have come here to film TV shows and movies.
Yeah. Well, I know about all of them because I negotiate our contracts for them. So, in fact, my second career, I think, is going to be negotiating movie contracts. So we've had in here some movies that you probably have heard of. We had The Other Woman that was filmed here. That was with Cameron Diaz, Kate Upton, Nicki Minaj. In fact, Nicki Minaj was sitting in our reception area, which is right around the corner from here. I had a chance to meet Cameron Diaz when she was here when we were filming, because she needed a green room to during the filming. They were here for about a week during the filming of that. She needed a green room, and so we had to have extra space for her in a space that we knew no one would go to. And so where's the place at a law firm that no one goes to anymore? The library.
Oh, there you go.
Right. Everything's moving to digital, so we set up Cameron Diaz's green room in the library. So it was kind of cool.
You're doing the current HBO show, Succession, right?
Yeah, Succession's being filmed here as well. The offices of the lead character, right, the patriarch of the family, is here around the corner from here. It's got an amazing view of into the World Trade Center site. So that's been filmed here, and they come back every time they need office space. They come back here and film it here.
So I remember going back when I met you, we were working on a very large AT&T deal back in the late 90s down here in Lower Manhattan. And that was some time ago. And we talked today a little bit about how the industry has changed quite a bit from those type of classic outsourcing agreements to the kinds of commercial agreements that are emerging today. So, again, when you started working as an attorney in this space at Milbank, is that right?
Yeah, that was 1997. Been practicing now for almost 30 years, and about the last 20 plus in this area.
Yeah.
And 1997 was the first time I started working in deals like this.
And that's when I met you, though. I remember the name of the project was called Project Clover. Do you remember that?
No, you know what? I actually don't. So your memory is proven to be much better than mine.
Yeah. So those were at the time, cutting industry deals. They were very large, but we were just talking about the nature of how these deals go through. I mean, I think those agreements were, I measure it in not pages, but how it was like 5 inches thick.
Yeah, at least.
And we had an army of consultants and attorneys and clients, and we had several floors on the firm. It was something else. And then today we contrast, the way deals get done. You were mentioning today, you even had, for some deals, maybe the smaller deals, you never even meet the client. It's all remote. It's through teleconference and email.
Yeah.
Very different, now, say 20 years ago, how it was.
Yeah.
You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. And it's kind of like, everything changes, right? Downtown, which is where we are now, we're on the base of, we're maybe the leading edge of Wall Street, right? We're right now at the World Trade Center site on Greenwich Street, the end of Greenwich Street. 20 years ago, nobody lived here, right? Now, this is a huge residential, space. There are restaurants, there are, bars, there's places to go out. They're in the process of building a really, what's going to be a really interesting multimedia, center, the Perlman Center, which is right next door as well. So the whole area is changing dramatically, and the industry too has changed dramatically. Like those deals that we did 20 years ago or so, where we did multi-billion-dollar outsourcing deals, where a corporation like AT&T would go out to a one vendor to do everything, and we'd have contracts that would be this high and sit around for 9 months negotiating them. There are some deals like that out there, but whereas 20 years ago that was the majority of the deals, today that's a small minority.
Yeah.
Maybe one deal a year is done like that.
So the name of this podcast series is Pardon the Disruption. And so tell me a little bit about how you see the market being disrupted. And we talked a little bit about, I'm going to lead you a little bit on this question. More so than ever, the creation and use and decision rights and regulatory issues around data are much more prevalent than they were, say, 20 years ago. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. I mean, it's almost all about data these days, right? Mm-hmm. And the value of data from both sides of the equation. Clients, I tend to focus on this from the client perspective because that's who I tend to represent.
Buy side.
The buy side, yeah.
Right.
Those going out to seek a solution. So from two perspectives. One is nobody worried about cyber risks 20 years ago, right? Nobody, there wasn't such a thing, right? People worried about confidentiality risks with somebody, leaving their laptop someplace, if they had a laptop. Or, a rogue employee walking away with data and setting up a competing firm. That was a data risk. Now, right, that's all anyone worries about because every business that has either online or has planned to go online. And, that creates huge risks. And every business has either been hit by a cyber attack and they know about it, or hit by a cyber attack and they don't know about it. So from the client perspective, it's all about data because you want to protect what you have. On the flip side of that, you want to, there's great value in data. And both clients and vendors want to come in and figure out a way to monetize it. So those are kind of issues that we didn't deal with 20 years or so ago.
So we at Rumjog, we talk about two playbooks or perspectives around everything from operations, but let's talk about it with respect to data. We talk about defense, which is ensuring, for example, it's a defense-offense playbook. But the defensive playbook on data is getting it right, getting it organized, getting it structured and safe and protected. But you mentioned the upside, which is the offensive capabilities. How do I now take the data that I have and create new offensive capabilities? And what's interesting about today's deals that we see and the engagements that we're on is it's not just the data that you bring to the table. There's a tremendous amount of data that is being created through the operation of new deals, the telemetry that sits and capturing that digital exhaust. But then the ability to take that and combine it with other data to create new recombinant data. And so you get into this whole issue about where does my ownership interest cease? And how do I ensure my protection rights through a creative process that's happening all around us? We don't want to stifle innovation on the one hand, but on the other hand, I don't want to leave a lot of money on the table if I have really cool data. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's really an emerging area, and I think we're almost at we're in the first inning now of all this.
Do you think that's right?
I do, because...
All right, so let's to go back to we've been in this for a long time.
The first inning on data.
No, I get that. Yeah.
Or maybe second. Yeah.
But like the last 20 years have been, I'd say, pretty good for people in your industry on the advising clients on complex service agreements and for consulting for sure. Do you think that as a result of data being in the first inning, that the next 5 to 10 years will be better than the last 20? Or do you think it's going to change radically so that it's only going to be good if you get positioned in the right perspective, or is it a qualified yes? I mean, what do you think about that?
Yeah, so maybe I should make clear what I mean by we're in the first or second inning. I think we're in the first or second inning because clients are just now figuring out and coming to the realization that they're sitting on data, troves of data that have great value. And some have really figured it out, right? And this is the model for Google or Facebook, right? And a few other companies, right? They figured out, and Amazon too, they figured out the value of it and how to monetize it. There are others too, credit card companies, right? Mm-hmm. The Amexes, the MasterCards of the world, they do great at figuring out what data their clients have and how to figure out value of it. But everyone else, I think, is just now beginning to recognize that there's value in data, figuring out how to organize their data and how to put it to use beyond, the traditional uses they have. So that's why I think we're in the first or second inning. We've got, market leaders like the Googles and the Facebooks of the world that have figured out how to use data and get value at it. But everybody else needs to catch up to them. So that's why I think we're in the first or second inning.
Yeah, you're describing the what I call the marquee companies in terms of data monetization, because they've really created tremendous valuations for their shareholders by really driving a data-centric business.
Yeah.
And but I think there's a lot of firms out there who are probably sitting on things they're not aware of. And we talk about with clients about going through a discovery process with them to say, what do you have? What could you have? What should you have around data? And then there's the so what, because we were talking before, WilmerHale does quite a bit of work in financial services. And financial services, like many industries, including healthcare and others, regulate the use of data, either by region or specific use case. So whether it be in healthcare, you have HIPAA. In Europe, you have GDPR. Right. Switzerland has certain rules around the use of data.
Right. California is going to have a rule that comes into place soon, too.
What's the California rule?
Well, the California privacy rule, right?
Tell me about that. I've heard of it. I don't know what it is.
Yeah, I think actually a lot of people don't know either. So you know what? I'll tell you about it in a year when it comes into place, because people don't quite know what it'll mean.
What's the headline?
Headline is further, restrictions around how you can use
without consent
data without consent. Not quite the European model, but moving towards it.
These consents, I'm going to tell you, I'm not a lawyer, right? But these EULA consents and the use of like cookies that pop up on every web page, the consent is in form only, not in substance, because no one ever reads it.
Yeah.
Right? So at some level, the politicians are going to say, I don't care if they agreed or not. They didn't substantively agree. And there's going to be some kind of regulation put in place. The use of these complex EULA agreements are, I don't know whose interest they serve, but, I think today people are, and I'll use Facebook as the example, as a sort of the mainstream cultural issue on privacy. Your data is worth something. And we talk about this, and we use this phrase, if the product or service you're using is free, you're the product, right? And the monetization of your use parameters and what you're doing, your location, your buying behaviors, your viewing behaviors, or sucking time from you for your eyeballs, like how do I keep you looking at this so I can put ads in front of you? You're the product. And that's all a data-driven exercise. And I think a lot of industries are going to go through that.
Yeah. Especially,
financial services is one of the most sophisticated industries technology-wise. So that's why you're getting so much work here. Plus, you're in the heart of Wall Street here. But what emerging trends do you see that you're trying to drive your clients to in terms of just their new thinking about their commercial agreements, and then specifically some of the legal work?
Yeah. So I think, Tom, you're right to focus on data, because What are the biggest issues we're seeing in contracts these days? Well, some are trends like AI, right, and the use of AI, right, by clients. That's clearly increasing. A lot of AI is in and around data, right? AI is powered by data. But even on the traditional outsourcing deals, we spend so much more time focusing on the defense, right? The risks of data getting out there and what that means to a client, right? If like having a big data event is a terrible, data breach is a terrible thing for the client, right? Awful publicity, it bad for their reputations. There's lawsuits galore, there's government investigations, right? There's big risks associated with that. So we spend a lot of time figuring out, okay, let's put the walls around that, right? Make certain that doesn't happen. And also risk allocation. If it does happen, who's responsible, right? Is the customer or the vendor? Vendors, on the supply side, they like to come in and say, listen, we're not your insurer, right? This is just a risk of doing business these days. If something like this happens, and if we do our best, we shouldn't be held liable for it. And on the flip side of it, though, clients are coming in saying, well, why are we bringing you in here, right? We're bringing you in here because you are the expert. So we spend a lot of time on those issues, but also increasingly the offense, like, helping understand clients, like figuring out what data they have, entering into discussions with the vendors about, there could be a win-win here. Like, if the client comes in and says, listen, you can't use our data without our approval. You can't anonymize it. You can't monetize it without having a say in that. It inevitably leads to a discussion about, well, okay, maybe we can partner together to, monetize this data together. We, the vendor, can go off and take it, use it in our other businesses, try to get other clients. And if we get additional revenues from that, you'll get a cut of it. So there you have opportunities for win-win solutions where, vendor can increase its, sales, customer can keep part of it, and you can protect your client of your customer at the same time by making certain that all the data is anonymous and not tracked to an individual.
Right.
So those are the discussions, the kind of interesting discussions we're getting into involved in agreements these days.
Yeah, another discussion we had is the notion of, and this gets into, you're talking about the breach of data, gets into cybersecurity. And there is this game that's being played with people trying to get in and then people trying to keep them out. But if you're trying to keep them out, you have to bat 1,000.
Yeah. And
it's hard to do. So one of the things we talk about with people is on the data side is, and this is where you get into some of the advanced technologies, is post-perimeter security protocols, which is doing real-time analytics on the proliferation of data so I can do anomaly detection once systems are live. And then the second thing is design your systems from an information design perspective so that you assume that the data is stolen, but you make it very hard to use without the magic keys. So I'll give you an example and you get a sense of this. I have a bank account, and I have all my money in this digital bank account. Or even, let's just make it a physical bank account. I have a physical vault.
I like the bank account example because
So the vault, a physical vault. The bank robber comes in, steals the money.
Yeah, it's where all your gold coins are, right?
All my gold coins.
All your bullion. Yeah.
Single place. And so if you break into the bank vault, you steal, you get all the money, right? But if I had that's $100 in that bank account, you could steal my $100. If I had 100 bank accounts with $1 in them, 100 different vaults, my risk is very low because, as soon as I find out 2 or 3 or 4 are stolen, I'm going to lock it down.
Yeah.
So my risk is marginal. Now, the reason we don't do that is because of the overhead of creating 100 counts for $100. That's crazy. But digitally, we can do a lot of things like that. We can start to break up and parse out our data into fragments that are unusable individually, but only used collectively. And then the collective nature of it is where the magic keys come in, is how do I stitch it together? So I could maybe have some aspects of customer data here, some aspects there, a file that's anonymized here, but you don't know how to put it together and you wouldn't know what it means. You could also put honeypots out there, which are false data, so that pollutes the data if you steal it, but we know where the honeypots are. And so you need all the ingredients to steal this. And this is how a lot of advanced communications work in terms of protecting. And I think we need to take some of those principles and apply it to data, assuming the data is going to get breached. This is one of the things we do on the consulting side. And then there's the whole legal side about it. If I do this representation, am I offering that up?
Yeah, interesting. You're basically trying to eliminate the human risk elements of that as well, because we talk about data being a technology issue, but a lot of times data in cyber risks is there's a human failure, right? I mean, look at the hacking of the DNC.
Oh,
right?
that's it.
Yeah, and or giving another example, we represented a client that had a finance and accounting contract with one of the big vendors. They were victim of a phishing attack where someone came in and set up a fake account for the vendor, right? And the client ended up wiring $100 million to fake accounts that ended up being in Cyprus and then were rerouted to Ukraine, right? All because they were able to come in and fake themselves as a legitimate vendor. Now, how'd they do that? They came in and changed one letter, right, in the root of the email address, right, and a person, right, missed it, right, and it got through. So, right, I think what you're talking about is like putting in systems that would eliminate some of the human elements of this.
But think about this, data in its very nature today, in this instance, is digital, and it creates a single point of failure if you store it in an old way, right? In an analog world, I put all my you use the term library for Cameron Diaz's green room. You put all your books in the library.
Yeah.
Because that's how you do it. It's an analog form. If I digitize the library and I put all my digital assets in a virtual library of a single point of failure, I can have those books stolen instantly with one click.
Right.
If I put the 1,000 books in 1,000 different places, it's like a treasure hunt. I might lose some of my books, but if digitally I have the map to those 1,000 and it becomes invisible to me, I can just grab those 1,000. The presentation layer to the user is still 1,000, but physically they're stored all over the place in the virtual world. That makes it very difficult. So I think when we create these new risks, we have to look at the new opportunities to create new business models or new structures that help mitigate those risks. It's not just about pushing the risk to the vendor or saying you have to give me a bigger indemnity or a bigger carve out, because I can appreciate where the service providers are coming. They can't sign up for extra liability and they can't be the insurance company. But at the same time, the burden is on them to say, if you're going to do business, I have a new way of doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the interesting thing is I think another way of looking at what you said is you have, you've eliminated the single cause of failure, right? In the example that you gave up,
yes.
Right? Someone has to come in multiple different ways to get the same benefit that they would have had if they came in through one way. And the same thing with like a human failure, right? If you can eliminate the human failure as well, right, you eliminate that single point of failure as well. The challenge, though, right? Do you think that with any technical solution, there's always going to be a human element somewhere? So in your example, where you can split it up into a lot of different vaults, is there some human that has the key to every vault and that you get access to?
Eventually.
Right?
Yeah.
That's
I would say there's no magic bullet here. There's just, I would say, creative ways to do it. So let's put this back in the legal realm in your world. You do this deal and the client rightfully says, I want you to take bigger liability, bigger indemnity, whatever it may be, for the protection of the data. And the service provider comes back and says, I'm not your insurance company. What my take is, risk is being created as a result of the commerce, either real or perceived risk. And I would say where we need lawyers and consultants and even more creativity on the sell side is to address that, how we can mitigate that risk, both real and perceived. Now, how you mitigate perceived risk is to educate people to say that risk is not real, or on a relative basis, it's less. But a real risk that's created as a result of the commerce, the burden is on the seller to mitigate that risk, in my opinion. Otherwise, I'm not doing it. I have to put it into the cost of doing business.
Yeah.
So if you're not the insurer, then I got to go hire Lloyd's or some insurance company, and I got to put that into the cost of your service.
Right.
So real risk, seller burden. Perceived risk, it becomes an education burden to make sure that, hey, I'm just perceiving this because it's new to me.
Yeah. Interesting. In the cyber world, it's sometimes hard to figure out what's real versus perceived, right? And sometimes the perceived becomes real, I think, in almost a Matrix movie type way.
Yeah.
But the market adapts too, right? Like cyber insurance, talk about differences in the marketplace. We didn't have cyber insurance 10 years or so ago.
Yeah.
Wasn't around that much 5 years or so ago. So, part of the risk mitigation here is parties looking up and saying, okay, maybe it's not right between me, the buyer, and you, the seller, to allocate risk amongst us. Let's pool the risk, right?
Yeah.
In the market as general, and that's what the insurance companies are doing.
I was friendly with one of the CEOs of one of the large service providers in Europe, and he and I had a long relationship over multiple years. And I tried to convince them to sell risk as a service. Now, cynical people will say risk as a service is called insurance. Yeah. But I said you should market it as risk as a service in your service offerings, to simply say, if you do it our way, we'll give you $100 million per event liability. And I said, what you're going to do if you get that is you're going to get a lot of people's attention on boards who are very concerned about third-party contracts. Now, you mentioned before when we were talking before we started recording, in financial services, especially after the 2008 and 2009 financial crisis, the regulators are on banks and financial service companies significantly around risk mitigation on knowing your service provider. It's like because there's so many service providers at banks and financial institutions that that becomes the weak link.
Yeah.
If you don't have the controls on it.
Yeah.
So if I'm one of those service providers and I sell $100 million per risk event, you're like, wow, that's pretty good. I'll take that.
Yeah.
Right.
It's kind of interesting. Like, you remember where we'd go to these outsourcing conferences 10, 15 years or so ago, and there were all these guys from regulators from the OCC and the Fed hanging around these conferences. You'd see them at every conference. And I'd be going, what are these guys doing here, right? And 10 years later, you figured it out because after the financial crisis, a lot of the regulators looked up and banks solved a lot of the issues They put in regulations that addressed some of the problems we had 10 years or so ago, like excessive risk taking, not enough capital, all this stuff. Now, what they've been focusing on over the last 3 to 5 years is a lot of these financial institutions have, 15, 20, 30,000 different vendor relationships. How do you govern all those? And any of this, in terms of risk, right? You're only as good as your weakest link, right? Mm-hmm. So they've been under tremendous pressure to put in place vendor management, procedures, good vendor management, and have good contracts. So the reason those regulators were all at our outsourcing conferences 10 or 15 years ago, they were trying to figure out what we did, and what was best practice. So kind of interesting. If you read the guidance that the OCC or the Fed puts out, it's like a how-to outsourcing guidelines that we could have drafted for 10, 15 years or so ago.
Yeah, I think the market's moving so fast. It's very hard for regulators to keep up. Typically, the top people in every industry get hired by the people with the money, and the regulators are playing catch up.
Yeah,
and the bureaucracy of creating the regulation slows down the process to keep up. I'm actually a little concerned about the regulation on AI in terms of its deployment in production systems, because we don't really fully appreciate AI and where it's going. I think a lot of people tend to poo-poo, well, it's all going to be a net benefit. And I think it's going to be a tale of two cities. I think you're going to see good and bad. Technology by its nature is agnostic. And I think we're going to find situations where data-driven decisions are made by AI that have bad social outcomes or bad political outcomes, but it didn't do anything wrong. It's just the nature of the deployment, and we're going to have a negative reaction to it. So I think the sooner we have conversations about regulation, one of my friends said, colleagues said, democracies democratic republics are very poor at solving future theoretical problems. They're only good at solving current crises.
Yeah, I think that's right.
And so I think in that sense, I'm pessimistic about our ability to get in front of this from a body politic. But I would say I'm very optimistic about where this is leading in terms of its overall net good for society. What are your thoughts on that? Are you positive, optimistic about all this?
That's a big question. Well, kind of one of the interesting things now is like regulatory environments, like they go up and they go down, right? And in the Obama years, maybe even in the Bush years, right, we were probably in a more regulatory environment, right? More regulations, not less. Now I don't think you could say that. Now we're just in the opposite. We're in a deregulatory environment, right? So, as long as I think the current administration's in place, at least at the federal level, I don't see much in the way of regulation coming out in this area. Maybe in privacy, right? There might be a push that in the privacy space, but probably not in AI because, frankly, nothing's being regulated these days more. Whether AI is going to be a positive thing or a negative thing, I think this is another area where we're basically not in the first inning. I think we're just coming up to bat.
Yeah.
What I fear is that some bad event will happen with some AI thing. Like there'll be an accident of an AI, from an AI-driven, taxi, and people will regulate it because of that, not recognizing that, accidents with taxis happen all the time. My wife got in an accident with Uber in Uber the other day. Thankfully, everything was fine. But something like that is going to happen, and then people are going to look at it and regulate it for those reasons.
Almost a Luddite reaction.
Yeah. Whether it's going to be good or bad in terms of things, I hope it's going to be good. I think kind of the interesting thing is that with AI, people have been focusing on AI taking over positions, and we see that, right? Frankly, we see it in the legal industry. Like we just licensed a program, a kind of a cool program that what it does is it looks at contracts and it analyzes provisions. So you could say, look at every provision where if there's a change of control of a company, is the contract permit that or not? And the AI will do that, and it's great at it. The problem is that's a job that lawyers used to do. I did that 30 years ago when I started.
Right. E-discovery.
E-discovery too.
Yeah.
So we're affected by this. We have to train our new lawyers better so that they can perform work at a higher level. So this is happening everywhere. If it's happening to us, it's happening everywhere. But people are focusing on that aspect only, the fact that it's going to eliminate positions, right, and functions. But it's up to us, and in your industry too, to kind of take this and train people better so that they have more interesting things to do. So it's not just a negative, it doesn't lead to a net loss of jobs, that people just do more high-level stuff.
So to me, I always think it's on that front, the AI taking the jobs is really a tale of two cities again, where I'll use this phrase, those who know how work for those who know why. And the how is getting rapidly hit by AI automation. And it's not just low-end jobs, it's jobs across the spectrum. It has to do with the structure of the job. The ability for you to pivot into that model and come out on top has to do with what we say two different dimensions, is your attitude and your aptitude towards the change. If you fight the change, you'll lose because the change is coming. But the second one is you can have less control over. You either have the aptitude to make the pivot or you don't. To move into the why dimension of work, to ask, in your profession, asking existential questions around legal issues versus mechanical issues on e-discovery. Does this contract say this word? That's a different skill set. The old sweatshops, legal sweatshops where people just reviewing boxes and boxes of discovery to see if something is compliant with a subpoena, that can now be done by software. Well, that lawyer who was doing that needs to up their game into more value-added things, or they're going to be rolled over. So that's why I think it's a tale of two cities defined by those two discerning criteria of attitude and aptitude.
Yeah, I think that's right.
So,
but it's going to happen in every industry, and it's almost like an extension of outsourcing. If again, looking at the legal industry, we were hit by outsourcing as well in the e-discovery area, and in some of these due diligence related areas. I mean, the first trend was for this work to be done in India. Law firm, outsourcing shops set up in India and other, lower cost countries to do this kind of work. And now that people don't talk about outsourcing anymore, they talk about the AI solution, that does the same thing. And for our industry, for every industry that where knowledge or information, drives the industry, that's happening. So, the same way that, outsourcing took jobs, arguably from here, right, and the middle sector of companies, right, and moved them to India and other jurisdictions, AI is doing that now too, right? So the same way that the companies adjusted here, that workers had to adjust here and be better trained to move up to that next level. That's this process is just going to continue.
So let me ask one more question and we'll wrap up. We talked before when we were doing a tour of the facility, the changes in the legal. So you've been in the industry for 30 years and I've known you for 20. The nature of, I'm addressing now this to young people. So people coming out of law school today.
People with less gray hair than you and I.
Less gray hair. I have some gray hair.
Yeah.
I dye it gray.
Yeah.
People coming out of school today have a very different experience jumping into a firm like WilmerHale and other firms like it than they had, say, 20, 30 years ago. Tell me a little bit about that, about how WilmerHale is sort of addressing, taking into consideration the different social attitudes towards work for the millennials that are coming out of law school today.
Yeah. Well, I think we are just, feeling the effects of change generally in the workforce. Like if you're in Silicon Valley and you're starting a job, right? You're working at your first tech company. How long are you going to stay there, right?
Yeah.
What's the average the time?
Months,
month?
years.
Yeah, right. It's a year or 18 months, right? And it's people don't look negatively in the fact that you move from company to company. In fact, it's a positive. They think, wow, you've been in so many places. You have so many different experiences. And also for the individual, right? For the student moving from place to place, it's great for them too, right? Because they're usually moving to a better opportunity. We're feeling that the same way in law too, because it used to be that people came out and said, you know what, I'm going to work at that law firm and for my career, or a good chunk of my career. Most kids coming out now don't feel like that. They feel like similar to someone who's starting up in Silicon Valley, that they're going to do this for a few years, get some good experience, and move on. And so we're seeing kind of more of that. Like we had a great, one of the best junior lawyers I ever worked with. He left about 6 months or so ago to work. He had an idea, started a company to use blockchain technology in a kind of new, innovative way and kind of apply the technology to kind of voting online. A really cool idea, something he really wanted to do. People didn't do that 10 years or so ago, but now there's so many opportunities for like great ideas. If you have a good idea, good chance you can get it funded. So we're seeing more and more of that.
That's
like
great.
People coming in and doing really kind of fun things and following their heart.
So you think the change that we see and the work-life balance and the opportunities for young people are better today than they were 20 years ago?
I think there are more opportunities than there were 20 years ago or so ago. Like smart, kids coming out of school who've got multiple skills are willing to learn. I think the opportunities are
Polymaths.
more. Yeah, and we've had to adjust too. Like actually, working in the technology area, we were kind of used to 20 years ago working remotely. Right, we'd take our laptops back then and our first versions of the BlackBerries, which didn't work internationally, and we were kind of used to it. Now. But we were kind of outliers, right? Most people worked in an office and didn't work remotely, right? You went home and you had to do work. Now it's just the opposite. That kind of almost the default is you work 24/7, but you can work anywhere. And so we've had to adjust that too, create flexible environments so people can work at home. They feel comfortable working at home. They can bring the technology. We've got phones that people can bring at home that can link up to our phone system. People can take hotspots with them so they can, they're going away the weekend, they can work on weekends. Pluses and minuses of that. The great news is you got a wedding you got to go to for the weekend, you go. No reason to cancel. The minus is, of course, we're all reachable 24/7.
Right. Well, Rob, thanks for spending time with us today, having WilmerHale host us here for these conversations we had this afternoon. Really appreciate it, and look forward to working with you in the future.
Yeah, great to have you.
Right.
Thank you for having me. Great to talk to you.
All right, thanks, everybody. Hey, thanks for listening to the show today, Pardon the Disruption. If you enjoyed our discussion, I'd invite you to head over to our homepage at www.rumjog.com. You can go there and check out our perspectives page and hear more podcast episodes, read some articles. It's some pretty interesting stuff. You can get access also to our Digital Disruption series. This is a meetup that we do mostly in New York and New Jersey area, where we discuss the impact of these technologies on our society and the way we live and work. We do this alongside of industry experts in various fields like crowdsourcing, automation, and blockchain, the technologies that are disrupting our world today. Anyway, if you like that, you can also follow us on social media at Twitter on the handle @Rumjog. We look forward to hearing more from you. Thank you.